What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the overview of the January patch 2022 AoE4 overview video. We'll be taking a look at the patch notes that were just released on ageofempires.com. I'll put a link down below this video for you to check them out as well. So we'll be taking a look at the changes. The patch will go live on Wednesday, the 19th of January. Today is the 18th, so we will take a look at the patch notes just one day before the release of the patch. So, starting off, you will have a general change in which it is going to be a slightly wider net of players you could play against. So basically, you don't have to wait that much for players, but it also means that you could be matched up against higher rated or low rated players as well. I don't know how to feel about this one. For now, I'm just going to trust with the devs here because this could have positive and negative effects as well. If you think about the positive effects, you could indeed reduce the time it takes for players to find matches. The negative effects, on the other hand, is that you might get some more unbalanced matches. So, for example, when two pro players try to match up against each other, they both stream, they both want to just play against each other, they know that they are about to launch the game, both of them, you could have them play against each other, right? But what happens if the game is going to increase this pool of players that they could get matched up against, and despite the fact that they queue up at the same time, they get matched up against different people. So we'll have to see how this works in practice. If this works as intended, I think it's a good change, but we'll have to see if we're going to have players matched up with massively different skill level players. Going down over here, you will take a look at the carcasses being carried 35% slower. This is a change I love, and this is an indirect nerf to many builds, most important the Roost Fast Castle build. So the biggest problem with the Roost Fast Castle build is that it is just a very well streamlined build. And part of the reason why is because you can ferry in all those deer carcasses. If you slow this down, you can slow down Roost Fast Castle quite considerably. You can also make nerfs to civilizations like Chinese ferrying in deer or the Holy Roman Empire ferrying in deer. I kind of like this change. I'm not exactly sure how much 30% is going to be exactly. I didn't do the math on this. But if this means that even knights can catch these scouts carrying the carcasses, then I think it's a great change. It's going to make it much more difficult to just go in and ferry in deer, because the biggest problem with that is that you just run in there and then you run back home and it's impossible for your opponent to kill you. Of course, if your opponent goes mass horsemen, for example, it's possible that he can pick off one or two scouts, but given how cheap scouts are, it's just so easy to get one or two more scouts out to bring in carcasses. It's almost impossible to deny an entire patch of huntables from your opponent, and basically your opponent can just go no army full of scouts to bring up the food to the town center. So this is a great change. We'll have to see if 35% is enough, but it's a great start, so I'm happy with this change. Horsemen 2-4 ranged armor increased by +1 at each tier. I'm not sure how to feel about this one. So in the November patch of the game, the Horsemen were actually nerfed quite a bit because in the release version of the game, Horsemen were quite powerful late game. They were rather cheap, they don't cost gold, 100 food apiece. So in late game, we could see just millions of horsemen flooding out, especially in team games, and it just warranted a nerf. I'm not sure how to feel about them getting +1 ranged armor every tier. They're already pretty powerful against archers, and the thing is that this isn't going to affect them that much in early game, but it's going to affect them a lot in late game. And as I said, late game have a great economy, so you could just be flooding out those horsemen. I feel like this could undo the nerfs that they did in the November patch. And once again, in team games, we could see just millions of horsemen flooding out because they are just so effective against everything. Being able to survive a lot more arrow fire could be extremely valuable late game, especially if you're up against civilizations that play mass horse archers, for example. Now, this could be a good thing as well, being able to defeat horse archers slightly more easily, but I kind of feel like this could make horsemen a little too powerful late game, so we'll have to see about that one. Holy Roman Empire, it's a bug fix, spear wall ability, finally working correctly, so they can now brace. That's definitely something that had to be corrected. And also they fixed the prelate bug, so finally the prelates no longer freak out. This has some consequences, namely that finally you don't have to go for the Alcon Chapel as your feudal age landmark. So far, if you played HRE, you had to go for the Alcon Chapel because if your prelate gets bugged, the only way to unbug it is to garrison into the Alcon Chapel. So by having this one fixed, we could see an emergence of some Minework Palace builds as well, although I still think that the Alcon Chapel is by far the superior landmark for H2. This being said, obviously these two bug fixes were just necessary. Rus, Horse Archer attack speed decreased from 2.0 to 2.5. Definitely needed a change because Horse Archers were extremely powerful for their costs. There were some bugs as well reported with them, so this is definitely a good start. And combined with the hunting nerf as well for Rus, it's definitely a way to make sure that Rus finally won't just play full fast castle horse archers every single game, every single map, because that's the biggest problem with the Rus. They just do one single thing all the time. So this is definitely a welcome change over here. Horse archers no longer receive additional attack speed and additional damage from the incendiary arrows technology. That's also something that you probably are happy with. It's basically a bug fix over here. And the big thing, warrior monks now move 25% slower while carrying a relic. It's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's sufficient. So here's the problem. When you have the Rus fast castle build, it's one of the fastest fast castles. And the biggest problem is that they just carry in the relics so fast because they have a combination of two things: a good castle age time, military presence from the horse archers, and actually the third thing, of course, is that the warrior monk is so fast when it comes to moving out on the battlefield. If you look at any other Age of Empires game, or even just the other civilizations in AoE4, the monks are usually slow. And with the monks being slow, you can intercept them. Let's say I have two feudal age knights. If my opponent is moving out to the slow moving monk, I can charge in and kill it. So I can slow down my opponent collecting relics. The problem with the warrior monks is that they are much faster than the units that you have on the battlefield. So even if you get one or two hits in, you won't be able to kill them. So obviously slowing them down while carrying a relic is a step in the right direction, but still, this is just one part of the problem. Because it still takes a limited amount of time for them to move out for the relics, so you can't really do much against them as they are running towards the relics. And then, as they come back with the relics, they will still have some escort with quite a lot of horse archers out there. So I'm not sure if this is going to be enough to prevent the Rus from having 4 or 5 relics every single game, because that's the problem, that it's very difficult to get even just one relic against a Rus player because they're able to gather them so fast. So this is a difficult problem, and I'm not even sure if I have a good recommendation or suggestion on how to deal with this, but this might actually need a bit of a change in the future still. So you might need to slow this down even more, simply because, as I said, your ultimate goal is to make sure the Rus can't just run out and pick up all 5 relics, because that's the biggest problem right now with the Rus builds. They are just pretty much guaranteed 4 or 5 relics simply because they hit Castle Age so fast, and then the warrior monks can just scoop them up. Mongols start with 50 less wood. This is a great change, I think. This is going to nerf a couple of things about the Mongols. It is going to delay their Dark Age aggressions, so it's going to delay Spearman rushes, it's going to delay the Horsemen openings, or, Horsemen openings as well, but in particular, the Scouts openings are more common with the Mongols, so any kind of cavalry opening with the Mongols will be delayed, Tower rushes, of course, as well. And I think this is actually very well in sync with what we are seeing in other Age of Empires games. So, for example, Age of Empires 2, the Huns that do not need to build houses start with less wood. And you're seeing the same thing here. Mongols don't have to make houses, so they could start with less wood. So I am definitely happy about this change over here. Outpost cost increase from 70 wood to 100. I think it's also a great change because the outpost is supposed to be used as a defensive structure, and if you look at any game, the Mongols just keep spamming dozens of outposts all across the map. And considering that they do have the trickle of stone from the Ovu, it means that they can place arrow slits and placements on them very easily. Compare that to other civilizations, the other civs can only place arrow slits if they already mine stone, and usually you don't see the civilizations mining a lot of stone early game, unless they are going for multiple town centers or something like that. But with the Mongols, you passively get the stone you need for the arrow slits, so your tower play is always going to be stronger than other civilizations, and because of that, you could justify having a cost increase to the towers. Obviously, the combination of these two here at the beginning will mean that the Mongol tower rushes have been nerfed. So I think it's a good start. We'll have to see how it works out. I think for now it's going to be enough. Mongol tower rushes will still be viable, but they'll be delayed. So it's going to be much more difficult to put a tower on the opponent's gold mine while he's still in Dark Age. So this wood cost reduction is actually, I think, more impactful than this 70 to 100 wood increase, because if you think about it, the biggest problem with the Mongol tower rush is that he's going to play double spearmen or double scouts, and you just don't have an army on the battlefield that's capable of fighting them. If you delay that tower rush by, for example, slowing down the Dark Age of the Mongols a tiny bit, then you can get some army on the field. You can potentially hit Feudal Age by the time the towers arrive. So this is a great start. We'll have to see how it works out, but definitely a step in the right direction. Fixed an exploit where there is possible to own multiple overs at the same time. I feel like, yeah, that's self-explanatory. That's not something that should ever exist. Mongols Khaganate Palace can now be backed correctly. Well, hooray! Tali Sultanate. They can also brace appropriately. Great. Keep tech times are no longer increased while in the influence of the mosque. That's also a bug fix out here. At the base research time reduced from 600 seconds to 135. I guess it's fine. Piety is not really a super important upgrade. It is an upgrade that gives 40% extra HP to the religious units. I'm actually going to show that on AoE4 Tech Sheet. This is a pretty cool website. It's AoE4 3.tech. I'm not sure who made this, but shout out to whoever did this because it's a pretty cool site. It's basically tech tree outside the game, and it's also getting updated continuously. Where am I going? It's getting updated continuously as the balance patches roll out. I think these are still the old data, of course, because the patch notes came out like 20 minutes ago. So, Piety, increase the health of religious units by 40%. Not something that's very impactful early game. Usually with Sanctity moved to Feudal Age, it's actually a little outdated because Sanctity is now in Feudal for the Delhi. But yeah, this guy was moved to Feudal, so you always start with efficient production, and then you usually go Sanctity. Piety is decent, and it's pretty impactful when you're trying to move out for sacred sites, though, because you want to make sure that it's difficult to kill the scholars. So it's not a super important technology. Quite a significant reduction on the research time, though. This might warrant players to get it quite early, simply because it takes so little time to grab it. Explosive-based research time increased from 300 to 900 seconds. So, as you see in the dev notes over here, basically the idea was that the more expensive a technology is for other civs, the more time it will take for Delhi to research. Now, I definitely welcome the change that you change explosives to take a little more time to research because it's a very important technology. Currently, it makes demolition ships insanely powerful, borderline broken. So, because of that, I kind of feel like this increase is something that you warrant or that you can justify easily, but this still doesn't fix the explosive problem. Right now, explosives is just way too powerful. It makes demolition ships turn into nuclear warheads, and that applies to every single civilization. So there has to be a change to explosives, regardless of how you buff the cost or the research time over here. Now, obviously, given the fact that explosives now takes a lot of time, if you ever would have Delhi on a water map, which is very unlikely, this would make them much weaker over there. So another reason why not to pick Delhi on water maps. Chaser Cannon's base research time increased from 450 to 1350. I don't think it's going to be super impactful. Chaser Cannons is a useful upgrade, giving you extra range on your cannon ships, but it's not something that you grab quite early on. So usually upgrades that you grab right after reaching the next age are the ones that are very sensitive to research times, simply because you need those immediately. Those are sort of the power spike technologies, and Chaser Cannons is not one of those. So having a longer research time on it is not as impactful as it is for something like, for example, Hardened Spearman, because the Hardened Spearman research time gets reduced from 210 seconds to 105. Definitely a good change, I think, because this way the Delhi will have a much faster reaction to, let's say, a Knight's opening. One of the big problems of the Delhi is that you start making Spearmen, and then you have to wait that otherwise pretty long Hardened Spearmen to research in order to be able to fight them in Feudal Age, because your Dark Age Spearmen are not going to be that great. So this is your biggest problem, your unit upgrades, especially the early Dark Age unit or the early Feudal Age unit upgrades are definitely concerning if they take a lot of time, because that's where you could be facing a lot of pressure. So French Knights come in, for example, and you still have Dark Age Spearmen. That's not going to be as great as if you could have the Hardened Spearmen out there. So having this reduced definitely helps them repel early attacks. We'll have to see if this reduction is good or if it's a little too much. To me, it seems reasonable, but I guess when we'll have this in the hands of the players, we'll learn more. Sanctity-based research time reduced from 300 seconds to 210. As we discussed, Sanctity is the upgrade that allows you to capture sacred sites. This actually makes the Delhi cheese plays of going for sacred sites on maps like French Pass, for example, a little more viable. Because remember that this technology started in Dark Age, it's actually still in here on the tech tree, but well, it has been moved to Feudal Age with the November patch, and now the research time is reduced. It's actually a pretty nice combination now with efficient production because you can start off with that, and then when you get to Feudal Age, you can grab Sanctity. Definitely will make the Delhi a little more legitimate when it comes to grabbing those sacred sites in Feudal Age. Herbal Medicine, also reduced. All right. Owned Blades. Now, this is the big boy. So, Owned Blades is probably the most important technology in early Castle Age on the House of Learning. It is something that's going to make your man at arms quite powerful, also making your knights very powerful. Where is that? Owned Blades. So, Owned Blades, making your men at arms and knights have more attack. This is a very important upgrade. Now, in the November patch, this upgrade was completely broken. It took so much time to research that it basically didn't even justify going for the House of Learning as your landmark because by the time you got this upgrade, it was almost game over. It took a ridiculous amount of time to research. I think there was even a bug involved with that, but I wasn't really playing a lot of Delhi, nor was I spectating a lot of Delhi because people just didn't pick this civ. Part of the reason why it wasn't picked is because Own Blades, one of their most important technologies, was basically useless for the majority of the game. So this is definitely a welcome change. 300 seconds feels a little too low though for the value of this upgrade. So having your man at arms become one of the best man at arms in the games and also making your lancers much more powerful, that feels a little powerful for a 300 seconds technology. Just compare that to the fact that Hardened Spearman, which is a feudal age technology, is 105 seconds. So this might be a little bit of an overbuff. We'll have to see about that one, but at least it's no longer a completely unviable technology. And I guess we have reached the part where everybody is going to be cheering out loud Fire Lancers. So looking at the Chinese, you will have the Fire Lancer cost increase from 80 food, 20 wood, 20 gold to 120 food, 20 wood, 20 gold. I have mixed feelings about this one. So first things first, food cost increase and in general cost increase is a good decision because it was very easy to mass Fire Lancers. If you look at the AoE4 Pro League sets, especially semifinals, you could see armies of like 90 to 100 Fire Lancers at minute 25-30 in a team game. That's ridiculous. They were just too easy to mass, and given how powerful they were, obviously that contributed to the fact that they were just so powerful as a group of units. Now, one thing I don't agree with though is that the increase in price came on the food cost. So here's the deal. First of all, I think a higher food cost is a good decision, but I don't think it's enough. Because if you think about it, the Fire Lancer is a light cavalry unit, just like the Horseman. The Horseman is 100 food apiece, so the Fire Lancer being at 80 is already a little weird, because it's basically a better type of Horseman. But anyways, the problem here, by only increasing the food cost, is that the Chinese have a great food eco. In order to get the Fire Lancers, you need to be in the Yuan Dynasty, and in the Yuan Dynasty you can make granaries. And with the granaries, your food eco is spectacular. So food is usually not a problem late game when it comes to Fire Lancer production. On the other hand, the Fire Lancers are very impactful and strong units, and in Age of Empires games, the strength of a unit is associated with its gold cost. You expect a unit that has a high gold cost to be more powerful than the ones that have a low gold cost or none at all. And because of that, I feel like if you wanted to signify that this unit is a pretty powerful unit, unique to the Chinese, and you would also want to make sure that it's a little more difficult to just spam them all day, all night, you would increase the gold cost. Because if you think about it, that means that you can't just charge in wave after wave of Fire Lancers, spam them in hundreds, simply because you'll be running low on gold. Gold is a much more precious resource than food. So while this increasing cost is definitely a step in the right direction, I really feel like adding a bit of an extra gold cost to this one would have done more. So personally, this is just my personal objection, and I want to highlight that obviously these were tested by balance testers at the developers. So I'm just giving my own opinions based on how I feel looking at hundreds of games I casted. But obviously these guys have been working on this, so maybe they are right. But my personal opinion is that it should have been something like 90 food, 20 wood, 35 gold. That would have been a reasonable combination. You would basically accomplish the same combined resource cost, but it would tell you that this unit is basically a better version of the Horsemen. So this way you would actually reduce the chance of players just spamming them all day all night, because they would be a lot more expensive on the gold cost. But also you would not buff up their food cost that much. Bonus for strange unit type removed. That's a good decision. They were already pretty powerful. Obviously, the reason why they had a light or a bonus damage versus light range units is because they were a light cavalry type. So just like Horsemen, you would have a bonus here. But given the fact that their blast damage is already quite powerful and in general the unit was very powerful, I don't think that you really need this. So this is definitely a good move over here. Now, here's where things get interesting. Fire Lancer free. Health increased from 135 to 155. Why? I don't understand this change. I'll talk about that in a moment. Charge weapon area effect will deal 50% damage to surrounding enemy units. I don't know this for sure, but I think this used to be 100%. So the nearby units also got the same amount of damage. If this is actually a nerf, so they reduced the damage that surrounding units received, then it's a good change because that charge was very powerful. So that's definitely a good one. Torch damage reduced from 51 to 36. This actually changes two things. It makes them weaker against buildings, which is definitely good. Fire Lancer sniping buildings is not fun for anybody. But it also makes them weaker against siege weapons. This is still quite a lot of torch damage, though. I think it's worth like 2 knights or so. So it's a pretty decent amount of torch damage still. I think it's a good change. But I have to highlight, this is pretty difficult to balance because currently the only way that you can nerf their building attack is if you also nerf their siege attack. The reason why I think this is fine is because they also did a ton of damage against siege weapons. Like, we could see Fire Lancers coming in and sniping 10 Clock Tower Bombards in 5 seconds. And that's ridiculous. Clock Tower Bombards already had a ton of HP. So, yeah, this is definitely a welcome change. Now, what I'm not really understanding is why they had to increase the health of Fire Lancers over here. They weren't weak at all. And let me explain why this is a little concerning. So part of the reason why Fire Lancers, or part of the reason how Fire Lancers could be stopped, was to have, let's say, a wall of Spearmen in front and then have Mangonels firing from behind. Mangonels with a unit that is able to absorb the charge in front of them were actually pretty decent against the Fire Lancers, because once the Fire Lancers charged in, suddenly they got clustered up and the Mangonels could do a lot of damage on them because their base HP was low. By increasing their HP, you make it much more difficult for the siege weapons and range units to do damage on the Fire Lancers. And I don't think this is something that you want here. And part of the reason why I think I'm a little concerned here is that before this patch, you had lower HP but higher torch damage. So let's say that you have 50 Fire Lancers running into my base. I have 50 Horse Archers. I'm going to start killing your Fire Lancers as you snipe my landmarks. The problem is that now in this patch, you lower the amount of damage on the buildings from Fire Lancers. So, in theory, it would take more time for you to destroy my buildings. However, it also takes more time for me with my Horse Archers to clean up your Fire Lancers. So ultimately, I'm not going to be more successful stopping your landmark snipe than I was before this patch, because even though you take more time destroying my landmarks, I take more time killing your units. And this isn't going to affect fights against, let's say, Spearmen, but this is going to affect fights especially against range units, in particular Horse Archers and such, will be much more ineffective against Fire Lancers. Now, obviously, once again, developers tested this, so for now, I'm going to give them the benefit of doubt. However, I really feel like the HP increase for Fire Lancers was just unwarranted. I think if you do these, reduce the torch damage, reduce the charge, and then increase the cost, then the Fire Lancers would be a legitimate unit. It would probably be the auxiliary unit of the Chinese, but that's exactly what you want. You don't want these to be the only unit the Chinese make. So I really feel like they could have just gone without these changes on the HP. And if the Fire Lancers end up being very weak, then they can pop out some HP buffs in the next patch. So this is a little weird for me. Notably, I did mention that the Chinese clock tower stuff have a ton of HP. There is no change to that. So that's the first thing that's missing. I think we could have seen some changes to that. The other thing I'm missing is Holy Roman Empire not having a change on the Palace of Swabia cost. This is something that the pro players and myself as well were talking about some. The Palace of Swabia is a very powerful landmark, being able to produce villagers very cheap and very fast. So, what is the reasoning behind having a cheaper coast even with the Palace of Swabia? And there was no change to that. Let's hope that there is going to be some changes to that because currently the fast Imperial build of the Holy Roman Empire is really powerful, and that's basically the only build they play because it's so effective. So there could be some changes on that, in my opinion. I'm a little surprised that we didn't see any there, but it is what it is. Maybe playtesting is still in progress for that. I don't know. Chinese clock tower bombards, as I said, still will be quite powerful. But the biggest thing that's missing from this patch, and I'm really not sure what to think about that, is animation canceling. This is a very controversial topic. I am against animation canceling. On the other hand, it's controversial even between some pro players because there's a debate which says that, okay, in order to have good animation canceling, you have to micro your little heart out, and that takes a lot of APM, a lot of attention, yada yada. Personally, I think the animation canceling should have been changed here, should have been fixed for this patch. I think the reason why it wasn't is because it's a very controversial topic, and right now even devs don't know what to do about that. I sincerely hope that in the next patch we're going to have the animation canceling changed, though, at least. Regardless of which direction they go, currently it's ridiculous that scouts, like even just one scout, can just massacre villagers. I'm over exaggerating a tiny bit, but basically that's the case. With animation canceling, same thing for elephants and stuff like that. So that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. I guess part of the reason why it wasn't addressed for this patch is because it's so debated and they probably don't even know what to do with it at this very moment. So it's a bittersweet patch for me overall because we got some good changes, definitely key bug fixes coming in here, but also the balance patches, some of them are pretty good, especially the Mongol changes. Those will be impactful in 1v1s. Chinese changes, not so sure about that. I think it's a step in the right direction. It's going to make Fire Lancers slightly weaker, but I'm really unsure about this HP buff, so we'll have to see how that goes. It will be interesting to see how Fire Lancers will be utilized in the coming weeks. That's basically it. Apparently, we have finished with the review. One more thing that we'll have to take a look at is a reference to the February patch. So we're going to have a new patch as well. I'm sincerely hoping that in the February patch we'll have answers to a couple of things. So here's my wish list real quickly. I know that this is not technically part of the video because this is just a review of the January patch, but here's my wish list. Some sort of addressing of the animation castling has to happen because it's very controversial, and I think it's currently one of the reasons why many players decide not to play the game because many people very much dislike that. I would love to see some change ups coming in for the Holy Roman Empire in a way that some of the other builds, aside from the Fast Imperial, become a little more legitimate because really all you see is Fast Imperials with HRE because everything is so well streamlined with them. I would love to see a bit of a change as well to Regnitz Cathedral because that's also a pretty powerful landmark. It's just millions of gold coming in. As I said before, we'll have to see how the Rus performs. I still think their fast castle build is going to be quite powerful, and I think that they will still have the majority of relics in most games. So I would love to see a way, especially if the Rus end up collecting 4 or 5 relics each game for the next month as well. I think there has to be a change on how the Rus get their relics. Maybe take away the cost decrease of the warrior monks from the Abbey of the Trinity, but that's something that will have to be kept monitored. And the Abbasid dynasty is also going to have some sort of buffs according to the devs. Not exactly sure how to do that. I think the best way to buff Abbasids right now would be to give them a unique technology that's relevant for their military for Castle Age, because that's the biggest thing that's missing for me. If you think about English, for example, they have clad armor for their men at arms. If you think about the owned blades, so many civilizations have some very impactful military upgrades for them that they can access in like mid, early, late game. And those are things that elevate them over other civilizations in many instances. Or like think about the infantry upgrades of the Holy Roman Empire, very powerful. And if you look at the Abbasids, you just don't see any of those. So their army ends up being mediocre. Obviously, they're still able to make siege weapons on the battlefield, but that's something the Mongols can do as well. So the Abbasids are a decent all-around civilization, pretty flexible, but I think they just lack a bit of a juice here to move in one direction. You could strengthen their economy a tiny bit more, make them an economy juggernaut, but I think that wouldn't be the great direction to go. I think it's better if you give them some sort of buff, or preferably, as I said, some sort of unique tech that buffs their army, which could make them a little more legitimate on the battlefield as well. With that being said, that's all the overview of the January patch. So thank you so much for joining in. It actually ended up being 30 minutes. I did not expect this one to be very long, but it is what it is. I've given you my opinion on these things. Obviously, as I said, it's a disclaimer from my part. I'm just basing my opinions based on what I'm seeing from the games I cast. Obviously, I spend dozens of hours each week casting competitive high-level gameplay, and I'm fully aware that the gameplay experience is slightly different on lower levels as well, and the devs also have to cater for that. But as I said, based on my experience, these are things that I think about the January patch over here. Down below the comments, I'm more than happy to read your opinions on what you think about these patch, because I'm really curious to see how you guys think about the changes that were made. Do you think these are warranted? Are there anything or any things that were missed out? Because this is the second major balance patch of AoE4. I'm curious to see what your feelings are about this one. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Make sure that you comment down below with your opinions on the patch. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.